at and we're going to start, which are like.
Okay, I'm gonna kick us off. I think some more people should be filtering in, but even if it's just us, we are small but mighty today. If we remain this small, I'll be sending you to take some meals home for your families. But thank you for joining us for the inaugural Food for Thought, sort of a reimagining of our lunch and learns where we are now primarily in person. I know we might have some folks joining us online. One of the things we wanted to make sure to do is particularly allow access to our EDD students who are often coming in from somewhere else and can't be here in person. Hi, come on in, welcome, welcome, welcome. And we're just getting started. Figure we'll let folks filter in. But again, as I was saying, thank you for joining us for our inaugural Food for Thought event where there is food and conversation and opportunities for us to engage with each other, to learn more and to share and to think about, in particular, urban education within the context of Pittsburgh. And we thought, and when I say we, I mean myself and the other interim co-chair, Syria Long, who sends her regrets. She can't be with us today because she has pneumonia. I know. So we just are sending her all our good wishes and vibes and hoping that she gets better soon. And so representing both of us, when I say that we really just wanted the opportunity to extend Q's reach to not just our community within the University of Pittsburgh, but Pittsburgh more broadly, and as it has been nationally and internationally, and continuing the great work that our predecessors, Dr. Elon Dancy and Dr. Rich Milner, did before us. And so, yeah, this is just sort of one aspect of that. And for folks who are School of Ed folks, you got to hear a little bit about our plan for this semester, but we hope you'll join us for what we're calling Q's Days, Tuesdays or Q's Days. Hopefully it's easy to remember, where we'll be having opportunities like this in terms of panels and outside speakers, but we'll also just be having opportunities for the doors to be open, for us to hang out, for us to talk. I believe Junior, who's been doing a beautiful job of marketing it, said it was a chance for like offbeat conversation. I'm like, I'm here for that. So anyway, just the opportunity to do that. And we thought one of the best ways for us to kick off was with some amazing folks who are doing work in Pittsburgh around urban education broadly. And we're not focusing on schools today. We'll actually be focusing on K-12 schools in particular in our next Food for Thought on the 28th, but focusing on community and family engagement, focusing on higher ed, focusing on early childhood, and thinking about that work in Pittsburgh and in particular within the urban context. And another thing that's really special about the three amazing people that are up here is that they are all graduates of Pitt School of Ed. I'm going to let them tell you a little bit more about that, but it's one way to think about how we take our mission vision and move it into action, right? Through the amazing people that come here, they learn, they challenge us, they push back, some a lot, and right? That's what we need to grow as a school, but it's also what we need to do to change education as we know it. And I wanted to read one real quick quote, and then I will stop talking, other than asking these awesome folks questions. And so it comes from Toni Morrison's commencement address from 1988 from Sarah Lawrence College, where she's talking about dreaming the world as it ought to be. And I thought that it was particularly well aligned with the three amazing people that we have up here, because it's talking about what it means to be educated and to receive that education, and to dream the world as you think it could be when you start that EDD program, or when you start that master's degree, or when you start that PhD, before you are under the drudgery of the courses, before you are hitting reality, okay? And I just wanna read just a little bit, because I think it really embodies the three of them. And so Toni Morrison writes and says, "For if education requires tuition but no meaning, if it is to be about nothing other than careers, if it is to be about nothing other than defining and husbanding beauty or isolating goods and making sure enrichment is the privilege of the few, Then it can be stopped in the 6th grade or the 6th century when it had been mastered. The rest is reinforcement. The function of education must be to produce humane human beings, to refuse to continue to produce generation after generation of people trained to make expedient decisions rather than humane ones. Don't let anybody convince you that this is the way the world is and therefore must be. It must be the way it ought to be. And I have had the sheer privilege of working with these incredible women as they have continued to work and push the world toward what it ought to be, right? Not just what we say it is. So without further ado, I'm gonna let everyone introduce themselves here. And then we have some questions that have been shared with them that they're gonna talk us through, and then we can open up for discussion. So you had the misfortune of sitting right next to me. And so I'll let Dr. Pinchback-Johnson introduce herself first and just tell us a little bit about who you are and your current role.
Sure. I'm Dr. Allyce Pinchback-Johnson. I'm born and raised here in Pittsburgh. I'm a graduate of Pittsburgh Public Schools and of Pitt and Carnegie Mellon. So I'm a Pittsburgh girl through and through. I am currently an organizational consultant, so I do a lot of capacity building and strategic planning work. But for the purpose of this conversation, I am the co-founder of Black Women for a Better Education. We started in 2020, and our focus is on improving outcomes for Black students in Pittsburgh Public Schools and beyond. Then I'll stop there because we'll get more into some of that as we go on with the panel.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jamilah Ducar. I serve as Assistant Vice Chancellor of the Engage Campus here at the University of Pittsburgh in our Office of Engagement and Community Affairs. And so a lot of my work is thinking about the core capacities of our institution, from our academic enterprise to our business and operations enterprise, every single nook and cranny of the institution, and how it can be reoriented to better connect and be more ethical and effective when it comes to their intersections with our broader communities. So very happy to be here.
Good afternoon. I am Dr. DaVonna Shannon. I am also, as Allyce described herself, a Pittsburgh girl. I came through Pittsburgh Public Schools as well. Center for Urban Education for my PhD. So happy to be back here. And right now I'm working as the Director of Research and Impact with an organization called the Early Excellence Project. And we focus on early education capacity building for directors and owners of early childhood programs across the city of Pittsburgh, and actually expanding some of our work beyond Allegheny County to Butler and Beaver counties. I also own and operate a consulting firm called A. Shannon Consulting, where I provide evaluation and programmatic design for education-related programs, so out-of-school time programs and youth development programs. And been doing that now for a little over 10 years. So I think my experience, a diverse set of experiences kind of brought me here today. Excited to talk more about it.
Wonderful. And so hopefully you see the breadth and depth that our panelists have to offer today. And as I said, I have a few questions coordinated from them, but want you all to join me as well. So if you wouldn't mind, and you can take this, and whoever wants to hit it first, but what motivated you to focus on urban education and advocacy for equity and justice in Pittsburgh?
I'll say that I don't think that I had ever given that a particular thought or an intentional thought. It was kind of in me and of my surrounding. I think when I realized that I was working in education as an educator, it had already been many years since I was doing that work. And I realized, oh, wait, this has been so natural for me to work in. I started working in out-of-school time programs when I was 14 years old as a tutor after school. And after many, many, many years of doing that and really finding myself feeling at home in that space, I realized that maybe I'm going to be an educator when I grow up. But I don't think it really occurred to me until I got to undergraduate at IUP that there was such a thing as rural education. I don't think I had really thought about that until I was exposed to it. And so it was then that I think I started to dissect and analyze urban education in a different way. It was kind of like taking a fish out of water and realizing where I had been for so long and what I was so accustomed to, which made me, I believe, just really understand education a lot differently. And that's where I've continued to focus my energy, my passion, what I believe to be really important, or, you know, thinking about the things that keep me up at night, the things that make me angry.
I can share that. I think my interest in urban education comes as a human services practitioner first. So my very first job was in crisis in-home services for child welfare. And from there, I sort of circled all of the non-negotiable systems that were impacting our young people and their natural supports. So I moved from thinking about child welfare to juvenile justice to our behavioral health systems, to then systems integration for the county, and then really started to transition towards education advocacy for a permanent supportive housing program here in the city. And so acting as this multi-generational education advocate where you're pushing to hold schools accountable to their own set of rules and non-negotiables, as well as helping caregivers advance their own goals, for me was sort of this light bulb moment of, okay, it seems like there are a lot of levers within our education system that we can use to improve quality of life for our residents. And so started to dig into that a little bit more. Allyce and I had an overlap at Pittsburgh Public Schools where I served as a consultant on their performance management team. But I didn't expect to be in higher ed. And my work here, I've taken that systems integration, that systems improvement lens to thinking about our billion-dollar enterprise here at the University of Pittsburgh as yet another system that's offering non-negotiables to our broader communities, and thinking about how we can unpack that a little bit more. I think I was maybe a non-traditional choice to join the urban education cohort rather than the higher ed cohort, but I felt very strongly that my contexts were deeply rooted in Black communities specifically, and thinking about those that hold quite diverse identities are those folks that are doing outreach and engagement work within higher ed contexts, as well as being sort of my primary community that I intersect with most often.
Absolutely. I think for me, it's in my DNA. So I have to go back through my ancestry a bit. So I come from a family of activists. My grandparents were on the front lines in the civil rights movement in Danville, Virginia, which is the last Confederate capital of America. My dad integrated his high school in Danville, Virginia. And so there's this notion of education, justice, of justice in general is something that has been ingrained in me. It's something that, as, I was, being raised that we never shied away from. On the maternal side of my family, I had a grandmother who had a desire to become an educator, but started having babies. And so she had 2 girls and 5 boys. The girls are on the ends, the boys are in between, and her aspiration for the girls was that they would pursue some type of higher education because she knew that the sons could make it either in the military or in a trade. And so this idea of education is just something that has existed in my family. My mom was a longtime educator in Pittsburgh Public Schools. She taught in the district for 38 years. She was my teacher. She taught at my elementary school. She was DaVonna's teacher, I think, for at least a year as well. We went to both elementary and high school together. And so just kind of this through line that always existed. And then as Jamilah mentioned, we worked at Pittsburgh Public Schools together. And so, I had a wonderful experience in Pittsburgh Public Schools as a student. Part of that was because of the experience that my mom had as a student, which was actually a terrible experience, but she was very intentional about what our experience would look like. When I say our, I mean myself and my younger sisters. And so, I kind of took that into this role in the district and learned very quickly, like this wonderful experience I had is not the experience that everyone is having here. in the district? What's going on? Why is this the case? And, I won't act as if I was naive. I went to Shenley High School, which is now an apartment building. But even in the school, there were levels, literally like the floor you were on represented the experience that you had in the school. So I understood that even there was something happening, but going and working in central office, I think those disparities became very evident to me. As Dr. DOC alluded to, sometimes it's hard to be quiet and not push back. And so, I was super vocal when I was there. And, I think in some ways it was appreciated, but ultimately not as much. And so I find myself on the outside looking in. They're like, oh, we're going to close your position. I mean, and I can tell people I got fired at this point, it's okay. But it really kind of led to the trajectory of like, okay, that's fine. Everybody can't do work inside of the system. There are ways that you have to figure out, what that looks like. And for me, it's now been thinking about how to impact that system from the outside. What does it look like to shift power? And then, coming to Pitt and doing my doctoral research and really understanding the legacy of Black political education advocacy, especially that led by Black women such as Dr. Barbara Sizemore and Wanda Henderson and some of the other Black folks in this region, I think is just really, made me understand that like in a lot of ways, this has been just like a divine guidance into this work. And that, as much as I think I tried to move away from it, I keep being pulled back because it's just part of my mission and calling.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting, having read all three of the amazing dissertations of these wonderful humans, the things that they're alluding to really come up in those dissertations, particularly what Allyce was just sort of wrapping with. So want to make sure that I just give a shout out and recommend. They're all available. No, I mean, through the university, and they point in more depth part of what they were talking about. Right? And some folks who are in the process of pursuing their own dissertations right now. It's, I think, some really good insight into how this sort of translates into the work. So thank you for sharing those sort of pathways and motivations and how you got there. And so I want to talk about the now and ask you, when you're thinking about Pittsburgh in particular, what you think in terms of urban education, what are the most pressing issues in Pittsburgh right now? And then connected to your own work, since you have, again, such different backgrounds and experiences and current positions, what are you doing within your role to sort of address those issues?
Dr. DOC, you actually started with this with Toni Morrison's quote in terms of just kind of seeing the world as what it is and just accepting the circumstances and situations that we are in as though this is just reality and that things just will be this way. I think are it's probably for me, the biggest concern that I have in urban education is that there's this belief that there's got to be a group of people that are at the bottom and that will suffer, that will struggle, that will face these sorts of challenges and conflicts. And we, I guess because of the way I think, I'm going to say we, because I think that we all have we're all implicated in this work, that we just kind of accept that these are the conditions that exist within urban education. And the best that we can do is just to work around them. And so I think like operating under that with that false understanding of our condition, I believe is probably the number one thing that is challenging urban education. But I think the other is addressing the symptoms of problems rather than root causes. And in as much as possible, I try to always remind myself and in the work that I do with partners and my full-time work is for us to constantly think about root causes. And you are probably all familiar with like the problem tree model. And I refer to that really often because It's our go-to, it's simple in a lot of ways, it's where funding lies, is in the leaves, the symptoms of problems, right? The things that we can see, the things that are easy to chop off. So if we are facing a Black teacher shortage, we just hire a bunch more Black teachers, and then we put them in what are essentially violent situations, right? Instead of really addressing why schools can be really violent for Black educators, we just hire more of them and we solve that problem. We cut off that leaf without really interrogating why are they running away from schools? Because all of these different initiatives, national initiatives that have all of these incentives for Black people to enter education, right? They're not working and they still leave within less than 5 years. So instead of interrogating what's making them run away, what's pushing them out, we just continue, on these hiring ramping up hiring at different phases. So I think about like what we can do, and this is not to suggest that I have the actual solutions or that they are indeed easy to solve, but there are some ways that we can address some of these problems at the root. And it's sometimes, for certain is the longer route. It is certainly the longer pathway. It can cost us friends, and allies and funding for, these projects, because it means that we have to talk about capitalism. We have to talk about white supremacy. We have to talk about a lot of the things that people don't want to talk about that have caused all of these. I mean, we could all sit here and generate a list on a whiteboard of all of the things that we see every day, but are truly rooted in historical, the schooling of education. And so that's what, when I think about the work that I do, I'm conscious of as often as possible to try to get at the root of how we arrived here, instead of being another part of another organization that cuts off a leaf temporarily just to watch it grow back when funding priorities change.
I've been sitting with this question since yesterday, and I truly do believe that for me, that I believe the most pressing problem around urban education here in Pittsburgh is our lack of urgency in upholding human dignity. And so again, when we talk about root causes, right, when you think about how it is we very easily fund nice to haves while we allow folks to sort of wallow in systemic and pervasive trauma, right? From sort of being unable to access our middle class, to access basic human dignity. I think that it's very, very difficult for us to get out of our routines, and us being a city. I also sit with what Dr. DOC offered in her own course when I was going through my doctoral studies and thinking about geographies of opportunity, right? And so many times we position our city as a geography of opportunity when it truly is not. When you're looking at the county level, when you're looking at the city level, we know, especially for folks that look like this panel, right, that despite our best efforts, despite our socioeconomic status, that we continue to sort of be steeped in this constant lack of opportunity for ourselves, for our children. And so connecting that to my work, right, and thinking about folks that have been traumatized and re-traumatized, who have normalized being othered, who don't necessarily have the capacity or the will, right, to think about things like capacity building, right? We have to sort of take it back and just acknowledge folks' human dignity, the experiences that they've had with systems, the lack of progress that they've seen despite their best efforts, and their need to focus on their day-to-day. We bring that context into our work. So our team is pushing to better understand how it is we can actively reduce barriers for the little things, what offering a meal versus a snack means for a young person, what offering transportation can mean for a family that truly does want to access an opportunity, and also resituating our campus community as a learning community, right? Rather than as a place that is resource rich and sort of pushing our knowledge and our expertise and our value out, reorienting ourselves as a vessel that needs to be filled through our community contexts and cultural wealth and capital in order to be successful, and repositioning that as necessary for the core functions of our institution to continue. We've been really successful, right? But it's when you're moving across this sort of cultural routine that's very counter to what folks have learned and have operated in for a really long time. You have to be somewhat gentle, when folks are feeling attacked in their way of being and knowing and operating. But I truly do believe that we forget that human dignity is core and necessary within the city. And when you're talking about folks that continue to not be invited to the table or continue to be consulted, right, but not actually included in any sort of visible or apparent way. I just think that it's really difficult for us, no matter what our philanthropic scene looks like, no matter what our education scene is looking like, no matter how it is we're preparing our teachers, that we're just woefully underprepared to actually be able to call folks in and resituate them within our city and society.
Sure. For me, it's making me think about something that, I kind of, one of the findings when I was working on my dissertation, that, we have been socialized to pave over people in history. Like it's just something that we do. When I worked in the district, I used to often say, like, our people perish because of a lack of context. And I felt that, especially towards the end of my time there, as we saw a new administration come in from out of town and didn't really want to take the time or make the effort to learn about, the city, what was happening, who are the people, who are the players, what are the things that can happen. When I think about the work of Black Women for a Better Education, and as I mentioned, there's this through line that exists that is connected to Dr. Barbara Sizemore, Dr. Jake Lyons, the advocates for African American students. That history is not something that even, being in the district, I was trained as an equity coordinator, not a coordinator, equity, what were those things called, Brandon, when we had to go through there too. But we were trained to basically lead equity work in the district, et cetera. I felt like I had a very strong, understanding or knowledge of it. And of course, like, okay, we know that there was this 1992 lawsuit that is actually still going on. So for the past 33 years, the advocates for African American students, who are represented through the Equity Advisory Panel as like the monitoring body, have a lawsuit against the district because of their inability to educate Black children at a high level. And every 5 to 7 years, the PHRC, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, weighs in and says, like, hey, you haven't made adequate progress. Let's do another 3 to 5 years. But we've seen nothing. We've seen no recourse. But the part of the history we don't talk about is before they got to the lawsuit in 1992, this same group of advocates flipped the school board. They said, hey, we can do elections now because it used to be an appointed school board. We're going to go ahead and use that to flip the school board because this superintendent is not doing right by Black kids. We're going to fire him and we're going to get one that does. And they brought somebody in. And then, we're sitting here in this 2020 context, like, hey, we just wrote a letter to our school board and said, we're concerned about the superintendent. How did we not know that these two things were related? And why did I have to come here and happen to have someone on my committee to bring that history together for me? There's intentionality around this. There's intentionality around saying, like, we are going to suppress the voices of Black leaders and Black scholars who have been doing this work and being in the trenches for all these years so that you don't understand the power that you have. And then what did we learn? Like, hey, it's actually really easy to flip a school board. Like, first of all, people don't even really look at their ballot and say, hey, there's a school board race. In some of these districts, you can win with like 1,500 votes. You probably have more Facebook friends than that. And you only need about $5,000. And so what can you do? Flip a school board. And so what do we do over 2 election cycles? We got a board majority on the school board. And, it was not simple and it has not been a perfect solution. But again, I think the bigger point is like, how do you understand the power that exists? How do you understand the things that have happened before? And then what is your responsibility? That was another piece of my work. I used Dr. Dillard's darkened feminist epistemology. Like, how do you use research as a responsibility? When you understand, these things, your ways of knowing as a Black woman, how do you then take those and say, I have a responsibility to my community to do these things differently or to change things? And so, to me, that then becomes our work is to uplift this connection, to remind our community of what we've been able to do, and then continue to do the work in a meaningful way.
Really powerful answers and thinking about the roots and thinking about the urgency and thinking about the history and the context. And I want to start in this direction this time only because you started to allude to Dr. Pinchback-Johnson, like some of the bright spots, right, in the work that you're doing. So you talked about the need for context. Can you tell us, and this question's for all of you, but like, what are some bright spots that you see then? Like we see what's not working or what is missing. What are some bright spots in particular in the work that you do?
There's not many. I think,
Flipping that school board.
well, flipping the school board, it is, I will say that, that was a big moment, I think, in our work, is to be able to get 5 people. So this, because just, for context, there's 9 people on a school board. When you have 5, you have a majority. So therefore you can, make some changes. I do think that, with this, group of 5 people now, there's things that, the board was not willing to talk about. So, the district is in the throes of reconfiguration. And that's a very tough conversation, because what it boils down to a lot of times is like, which schools are we going to close? But, I think we have to look at the bigger context of, why should we continue to support a district that has schools that are sending our children to jail and to early graves? Like, why do you get to keep a school open and then make us pay for it? Because again, like, we talk about free, it's not free, it's with our tax dollars that these things are happening. And so, I think, we talk about, there's a budget deficit. I don't know how you can't get something done with 20,000 kids and $900 million. Like, please. But, nonetheless, we do know that, a lot of things are happening and that the district is facing a deficit. And so decisions do have to be made. But the hope is that, with the folks that are on school board, that there's going to be a level of thoughtfulness. We've gone through reconfiguration in the past. We closed 36 schools, and from 2004 to 2012 or something like that. If we're going to do this right, how do we make sure that we center the needs of Black students? And why should we center the needs of Black students? Because Black students are the largest demographic of students in PPS. We are overrepresented in PPS based on population. It's a 20% Black city with a 55% Black district. So if we want to talk about the condition of the district and who, needs to be loyal, white folks have been done with PPS. Because there's no way you live in a city with 77% Black folks and only, 30% in the district. So, if we're going to be the ones that are going to continue to uphold this, then we need to be the ones that are at the center. And so the hope is that, this is the work that's going to happen. I would also point to a bright spot about board governance. That is something that this particular board has taken on. Like, how do we think about utilizing board time, like legislative meetings, to actually address issues, bringing, progress indicators to the conversation, and not just saying, okay, $1,000 for this thing, check, $1 million for this thing. But here's what the issue is. 66% of our kids can't read by 3rd grade. What are the curricula that we're going to approve? What are the supports that we're going to associate? And then how do we come back several months later and say, we implemented these things, how are they working? And so I think there's some positivity there. Of course, there's a school board election coming up, and I'm putting that out there for folks. If you live in the city of Pittsburgh, figure out where you live. If you want to run for school boards, you absolutely should. It's important. We have 3 folks who we have on school board now that are, those seats are up. And so we need to continue that work as well. But I think we always have been on a parallel track of like, we understand that, by leveraging school board, you have people who then get to make decisions about the money and how the money is spent. You also have people who are making decisions about the superintendent. Their job is to hire and to evaluate and make sure that person is doing what they're supposed to. Neither of those things were happening the way we wanted them to, which is why we decided to flip the school board. And then I had another thought that is escaping my mind about that. But I'll stop there for now and come back and maybe I'll think about the thought that I had, because I did have a through line to that, but.
Dr. Ducar, things that are working in the bright spots.
So I think for my body of work, the bright spot, the primary bright spot is actually in the people doing the work, right? And so you'll see that very strongly in my dissertation. It has been the bread and butter of my experience here working at the University of Pittsburgh, that the relationships that you cultivate with like-minded folks, with folks that are willing to be those loving agitators, the networks that we build are extremely powerful. And so you can't think about making infrastructure changes, systems changes without having a set of people that feel connected to each other, not just through their professional identities, but through their own orientations to the work. And so that has been a really powerful experience, and me feeling like I am a part of the University of Pittsburgh and bring some value. And I'll shout out Holly, who just came in the room. I have to. So Holly Hickling, right? Like in my very first weeks, I was introduced to her and this network of folks that were thinking about how it is community engagement could be more important to the institution, how it could be an institutional priority. And so I'd say, right, we've changed leaps and bounds since our days of trying to MacGyver convenings together, begging $500 at a time to be able to put something together, to really being able to say here today that like the office of the provost and the office of the chancellor now have made a 5-year standing commitment to make sure I have the money that I need to pull together all of our outreach and engagement practitioners across our campus and to continue to propel the work forward on behalf of the University of Pittsburgh. So definitely the people are most certainly a bright spot. I would also say that our critical scholars here, right, that we are attracting the right types of deans, of directors, of department chairs that are also within their own ecosystem starting to propel this cultural change. So it's not coming from a single team or from a single point of interaction, that now there are folks that better understand what is possible, right? We've gone from like, maybe that's plausible, right? Some of our early interactions, especially within business and operations, right? You want to get to what % spend with disadvantaged businesses on our buildings that we're building to, in Hazelwood, we're going to hit a 50% DBE spend for our construction spend, right? And so thinking about how it is we can take our University of Pittsburgh dollars and really start to walk the walk when it comes to just the way that we operate as an institution, but as well as, I'm starting to get my feelers into our research enterprise, right? Because when I hear $1.2 billion, I think there has to be some money in here for thinking about what our partnered work looks like, what our research practice partnerships look like, and to start to think about where are our community agendas showing up when you are breaking down this $1.2 billion. So for me, those are all really, really bright spots. But first and foremost are always the people, because if you have folks that are feeling broken down, right, whose vessels are empty, I feel like my dissertation sort of led me to an early warning system for folks that would be exiting our systems, right? That if they were disconnected to institutional strategies, if they did not have those natural networks of support within their organizations, that they would find their way elsewhere, right? And think about what they can do from outside of those systems to try to continue to build their personal missions.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking right now about probably one of the biggest bright spots in my work that really does motivate me to continue doing this work because it is sometimes that, you feel a little bit hopeless. I'll speak for myself in terms of like really making progress. So the Early Excellence Project has collaborated with Duolingo, the language learning company, and Trying Together, formerly Pacey, and a consulting firm called Candor & Co. And Duolingo has committed $2 million over right now 2 years to energize and build capacity and increase access for early childhood education in 5 zip codes in the East End. And the Early Excellence Project is the fiduciary and manager, and has been guiding. I have been guiding this project now for about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years. And what's unique about this project is, as I spoke about a moment ago, as a nonprofit organization, we're often reliant on, philanthropic dollars that are fickle sometimes. If you're lucky, you can access some federal funding, but even that, is not always reliable. But where we have found some success is these sorts of corporate partnerships that are not, I think what also makes this project innovative is that Duolingo didn't just pass us $2 million and walk away and say, send us a report. We meet monthly. And I meet specifically with the head of social impact, Dr. Kendra Ross. She may be watching on Zoom, hopefully. And she's been so committed to this work. And it's impressive because Kendra will say, I'm not the expert in early childhood, you all are, but I want to make sure that we're actually, and she's holding us to this, that we're actually making an impact that, for one, makes sense and that makes a difference. And so I can talk to you a bit about some of the difference that this project has made. We identified 9 early childhood sites, again, in these 5 zip codes that are ranked Keystone Star 3 or 4 at the time, about 2 years ago now, as one of the quality indicators in the state. And they went through this application process. They stated all of their goals as mostly speaking to the directors and owners of these programs. And so they each received a grant through us, but from, funded by Duolingo, that was geared toward capacity building. And overall, you all can imagine what they use these funds for: wages increases, of course, classroom improvements, that sort of thing, professional development, some of the things that may sound kind of mundane, like, of course you did. But when you think about economic security in the city of Pittsburgh and Allegheny County alone, but specifically with early childhood educators with an average of, if you're lucky, making $15, maybe $18 an hour, truly not surviving, but doing the best that they can. The providers that we worked with were able to raise their hourly wages for their full-time staff on an average of $5, which is, that's a huge raise to get as an educator. One of the providers, Shady Lane School, was able to eliminate the employee contribution to their healthcare benefits. Tons of good things have come from this partnership. So we said, well, what do we do now that they're making all these, we got to sustain these changes, right? They've made some part-time faculty or staff into full-time. They're sending people back for CDAs and they're completing their degrees. All of these great things are happening, but we got to sustain it. And so Duolingo, again, I have to shout out Kendra Ross because this is her program. This is last year was the inaugural year, and she's had to go back to the CEO, in fact, of Duolingo and really push the importance of this program and said, we can't do this for 1 year. We have to keep this going. So in year 2, we provided another grant to continue the capacity building while also providing executive coaching for these providers to help them start to think more like business owners rather than someone just operating a home daycare because of the need, but actually seeing themselves as entrepreneurs and building that skill. So accessing, low interest, no interest credit, being able to to forecast their businesses beyond 1 year, all of these sorts of skills that they're building. So we said, okay, so we'll do another year of capacity building, but then we'll also offer scholarships to families who are on the cusp. So they're at the between 200 and 300% of the poverty line. So they're not quite eligible for public subsidy, but they still can't afford daycare. It's sometimes $1,300 a month. They can't afford it. So they're right in this gray area where they can use the support. So when you think about equity, we are, again, working with mostly Black women educators who, are operating these businesses, meeting them where they are, filling specific needs that they say that they have, not that we say that they have, and then increasing access. So making sure that families who truly need the care, want to continue the care, are carrying balances because these owners are saying, keep coming, we'll figure it out. We'll figure this out together. So clearing those balances off for those families, to me, that when you talk about a bright spot, that gets me excited because I know that this is truly a difference. So, the so what of all of this is that Duolingo is a model for how corporations can make investments. And again, not just tax write-offs, but like truly dedicating hours of their time to something that's so important. People can't go to work if they don't have childcare. So that's what's in it for corporations, right? Like not only just strengthening the community that you live in, but making sure that your own employees can make it, right? So those are the types of things that right now are really motivating and exciting for me.
I did think that to my thought. So I was talking a little bit about like the need for, this work around like school board, being able to select, superintendent, but also to manage our tax dollars and how they're being spent. But I think for, another piece of this is also about thinking about like, can you actually make this change in the system? And I think part of this is kind of this, like, in some ways this experiment, like, we kind of have this, like, if you, select these folks and make these changes, but like, we also know we can't necessarily use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. We know that these education systems weren't really set up. So when I was thinking or talking a little bit about that parallel track that we're on, I think there's always been this idea of what we like to call the Blexit. And what we mean by that is the Black exodus of Black children from Pittsburgh public schools. And so, if we've given some effort to this work and we're going to continue to say like, hey, how do we try to change the trajectory of the district by having highly qualified school board members and a superintendent? But if we can't, then how do we then start the work of building the ecosystem of alternatives to the district? And, it's not one thing. We think it's multiple things. And, we've gotten a lot of pushback like, oh, you all are the charter pack. You want to just build a whole bunch of charter schools. No, we think that folks can make the best decision for their families about where their kids should go. If it is a charter school, great. But we also see hope and, the Black homeschooling movement. And we saw that not even just in Pittsburgh, but around the country during the pandemic, where folks were like, we're going to start homeschooling, our children. We have some amazing experts here. What does it look like to build a co-op? And of course, for me, this is very personal because I have a baby that's going to kindergarten in the fall. I just enrolled her in our district and picked some magnet options and did a few other things, but it's not sitting right in my spirit. I'm like, I don't know if this is for me. So, there's also this piece of like, what is it that we need to build to ensure that our kids are going to get a high quality education? So, it's kind of like a both and for us as we think about our work.
So I so appreciate, especially the bright spots and the ways that you frame them across the lifespan, across, the urban education landscape. And I realized somehow we're like only about 5 minutes to, I'm like, oh, okay. I could, talk with you all day, and I'm sure folks could listen. So I want to open up, I know we only have about 5 minutes, in case anyone else had any questions, anything that they would like to hear from our panelists.
I just want to say thank you. I resonate with everything y'all was saying up there. So it was just refreshing to hear your perspectives and what's going on. So thank you.
Have fun. panels are hard because I want to ask each one of you like 5 questions. But DaVonna, you were talking most recently and the story really was resonant. I'm curious about, so $1 million is great, but it's pretty limited. Well, two-part thing. So did you work with the same providers in year 1 and year 2? Okay, and then how do you think about, because like obviously, like I do all my work in out of school time where we have the same issue of underpaid staff and high turnover and all those things. And I've thought about, well, should we try to get all of the foundations to raise, to demand a certain minimum wage or something like that? So where do you think it leads? Duolingo will fund for a while, but not forever. So how do you think about this moving the system?
Yeah, so the first point, we are working with the same providers in year 2 with the plan that in year 3 we'll continue working with that cohort of providers, but then also recruit others who are Keystone 2 or 3. With the idea that we're helping them to also build their capacity from it. They'll have totally different needs. They're in a totally different position. We also work pretty closely with the Early Childhood Funders Alliance, which is being managed by Candor and Co. And so they're not funding this project at all. But what we're doing is making presentations to their facilitator to show where the potential is, because we want them to start to think about years in advance where they can start to funnel their dollars, so that when Duolingo, you're right, starts to phase out, maybe then we're thinking about even Giant Eagle. Again, I'm hoping that the right people are listening, right? The Giant Eagle, right, is willing to, to fill in some of that gap, right? But we're thinking about the funding community and where their priorities are, where their priorities are headed. Heinz made a huge shift out of early childhood education, and that leaves us really vulnerable, right? But then, so it's all of this, these spider webs of funding streams that we're all trying to make ourselves attractive to. But I think the bigger thing is making sure that business owners can begin to think about those things on their own, so that they're not waiting for an organization like Early Excellence Project to say, so where do we go now? One of the questions we were going to talk about was collaboration. Foundations always want us to collaborate, right? But collaborate sometimes in ways that we don't necessarily see as effective. We're all doing the same work, and now we're in high schools. There's 37 mentoring programs in high schools, and we're all, rather than working in a way that these are the skill sets that we specifically bring. We know that these 3 other things are critical issues. We can't be that as well, but we can identify another organization that can do that piece. And then there's another piece that comes in and kind of like the cogs and the spokes and the wheels to build the wheel, or whatever the analogy is. So I guess I'm thinking is, a couple of different things, constantly thinking about that dance between different streams of funds and where they come from, but preparing business owners to be able to manage their businesses in the most effective ways, and building collaborations that if Early Excellence Project goes away, that there's another organization that has that particular skill set that will focus on continuing to build the strength and the tenacity of business owners, so that ultimately more children and families are served. It's a tricky, that one's a tricky piece. Nothing lasts forever.
So I see we are at 1 o'clock, and similarly, I can listen and talk with you all day. So our panelists will be around for a little bit if you want to ask one-on-one questions or just touch base with them. I had a question in here for our grad students in the room, which is like one piece of advice you would offer to grad students. So some of you might want to ask that question as they've lived through this whole process, but anything that's open. But I hope that you'll join me in thanking our wonderful panel and just congratulating them on the And thank you again all for being here. We hope again you'll make Tuesdays and join us for the rest of our calendar for the spring.
Thank you.
That was great.
Yes.
I mean.